Good morning, ng-conf. I hope everybody's staying healthy and that all of you are enjoying this very unexpected edition of our conference. Before we begin, I would like to actually give a big shout out to the ng-conf organizers for pulling off this virtual gathering on such short notice. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You people are so freaking awesome. We couldn't do this without you, and we are so grateful to have you. Thank you. For those that don't know me, my name is Igor Minar. I'm a software engineer at Google, and I'm an Angular UberTL. Today, I would like to share with you some insights from behind the scenes of making Angular. Specifically, I would like to dive into a tension that we see between the needs of developer experience, or DX, and user experience, and UX, and talk about how we balance these two in Angular in order for you to be able to build applications that users love to use. I'm sure that as many of you, I too am a strong believer in the web platform. It's a platform that is ubiquitous. It's available almost everywhere. It's accessible. It's accessible to everybody regardless of their skills or means. And it's malleable, which means that we can build very interesting user experiences on the web. But it's also a platform that is ever evolving. It's not stagnant. It changes, it improves, and it does so in a very stable way, so we don't need to deal with breaking changes very often. On the other hand, if we look at the web ecosystem, the ecosystem of loosely grouped tools, patterns, and libraries, it often feels like we're dealing with a house built of cards. For the longest time, I wondered why were there so many tools, libraries, and patterns seemingly doing the same or very similar thing. And I don't know if I got the answer quite right, but something tells me that maybe this tension between the developer experience and user experience and the trade-offs different solutions make results in big variety and diversity of solutions we have on the web. Often, but not always, the requirements and trade-offs that result in a good developer experience worsens the user experience. The opposite is often true as well. And you might wonder, how does this manifest in the real world? What is the common symptom? The one I see very frequently is waiting. Who here loves waiting? Please raise your virtual hand. Well, I hope you're raising your hand because I can see you. But I do have to personally confess, because I do love waiting for certain things. I love waiting for sunsets or sunrises. What I don't love waiting for and grow very impatient is when the application is taking too long to load. Similarly, I often have a hard time focusing on work when a program I'm working on is taking a long time to build, rebuild, or test. Nobody likes waiting, especially when you're trying to do something and waiting is in the way. But waiting is real and way too common for both users and developers. And as we develop our tools and applications, we often make trade-offs between who's going to wait a bit more. These trade-offs do exist. We should accept them, and we should treat them as a necessary evil of an imperfect world. We should focus on finding the right balance between making the trade-offs that impact the developer experience and user experience, and finding that middle ground between the two. We should also, however, acknowledge that building awesome web experiences requires a lot of collaboration. And it requires a lot of collaboration because it's a complex task. We often cannot do it by ourselves. And the more people are involved, the more people start to make trade-offs. Now, if we look at the web, we see that there are lots of people involved at different levels. We have web platform engineers that are making their trade-offs. We have library authors that are making trade-offs. We have component authors, reusable component authors, that are also trading certain things for others. And lastly, we have web developers that are building the applications by assembling all these pieces and running them on the web platform. We should also not forget about the end users that get to use the end result of this work. However, I have to point out that this slide is slightly outdated because in today's COVID-19 age, the proximity of the users is not very safe. So let's fix that. Oh, okay, that's much better. Stay healthy, everybody. Please stay healthy. So as we saw, there is a lot of people making trade-offs at different layers of building web experiences. And these trade-offs add up. They often affect developers, but also users. And rather than seeing this as an obstacle, I wonder if we could change a perspective and saw things slightly differently, or actually quite differently. What if user experience and developer experience were friends and were helping each other? What if they were reinforcing each other? How could that work? Well, I strongly believe that a great user experience meets the user where they are, regardless of who they are. In fact, I'm often fascinated by watching someone who hasn't used a modern UI as much and gets to use the cell phone for the first time. For example, a young child or an elderly person are great study subjects. These people have no preconceptions about how modern UIs should work. And all they know is the real physical world. They know how to interact with it. They know how it should behave, and they have expectations around that. A great UI is one that is easily understandable by these people because it behaves like a real world. A poor user experience, on the other hand, is one that is janky, uses odd UI interactions, breaks user expectations around not grass, about gravity, mass, inertia, and other essential laws of the real world. Great UIs feel real. Great UIs feel alive. It feels like you're touching it and it just is one with you. They feel right. And they are fast. A lot has been said about the speed. I don't want to go into details, but there are studies upon studies that tell us that fast UIs result in better user experience. They result in better user experience because people feel more immersed in the experience. And this results in more interactions, in more conversions, and in more satisfaction that people interacting with the applications have. And often, the speed can be approximated by the size of JavaScript bundles that we ship to web clients. We're going to talk about that in a bit, but before we get there, let's talk about how to actually build these great UIs. Because building great UIs requires mastery. Just like learning to use an instrument, musical instrument, or any kind of form of art or sophisticated engineering, there is a mastery that is required to achieve great results. And mastery requires practice. Mastery also requires iterations because you want to go over many things, many failures. And of course, failures are part of the success because the more you fail, the more you learn about how not to do something. But the way you want to fail fast, and you want to fail safely. You want to learn from that and move on. Unless you're adventurous type, in which case all bets are off. But for the most users, iterating quickly enables us to explore more options, more variations, fail very often and quickly, incrementally improve, and end up with a much better result than the first thing that we got working and was just somewhat working. But if we optimize just for iteration cycle and fast iteration cycle without consideration for the impact on the user experience, the results could be disastrous. Balancing these two needs is challenging, but it's a challenge that is worthwhile. I bet that many of you had an experience where you were able to get the balance just right. You fine-tuned your application stack and you optimized your user experience, and the application was just bliss to work with, and the users loved it, and everything was awesome. This is great, but the problem rises when such applications need to scale and need to grow. Balancing the developer experience and user experience at scale is what changes the dynamics. The stakes are much higher. Doing it repeatedly and sustainably takes the challenge to a new level. And this is what Angular is trying to do. Angular goals is to make developers successful in developing great user interfaces. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that we found the right balance yet. We ourselves are still iterating. We made a lot of progress in this area, and I'm going to share some of that, but we still have a lot of work to do, and we invite you to be part of that. A good example of what we've already accomplished is if you're starting a new project today, you can start it by running command ng-new. This command will generate a new project with reasonably good defaults. You have reasonably fast iteration cycle. You have a set of build time checks that tell you when there are bugs in your code that you should fix. And you also have a production optimization pipeline that shrinks your application to create as good user experience as possible. Well, how much better, how much does this optimization pipeline affect the application? Well, if we take a simple example of Angular I/O, which unsurprisingly is an Angular application, and look at the total sum of all of the JavaScript code that we iterate on during development, including all the libraries, including all of the lazy loaded chunks, it's about 5 megabytes. With the optimization pipeline, we can reduce that size by 87%. And this is before the gzip or Brotli compression even kicks in. So it's very significant improvement. And in fact, one of our former team members, Hans, he used to joke that if we keep on improving our optimization pipeline, we'll soon end up with negative payload sizes. This didn't quite happen, but over the last few years, we actually made a lot of improvements and gradually improved the user experience of all the applications built with Angular. And we actually accomplished improvement of a magnitude, or 1/10. But we're not done yet. If we look at applications that are being built with Angular today, without any advanced tricks, you usually see small applications in the neighborhood of 150 to 200 kilobytes. This is okay, but it's not great. And we know that current theoretical minimum for Angular is about order of magnitude lower than that. So we will keep on chipping away and making things better, but we are also balancing that with other priorities like improving ergonomics of our APIs, adding features, fixing bugs. Now that we made so much progress in the area of optimizations and shrinking the payload size, we feel like we have a little more space to focus on other things in other areas of the platform. As Kara mentioned yesterday, V9 and IV have been a big milestone for us. We delivered significant user experience improvements to all of the Angular applications that upgrade to Angular version 9. But it wasn't just the users that benefit from version 9. It's also developers, because developers will benefit from lots of improvements that V9 is packed of. We improved build times, testing times, rebuild times, localization of the application. And I'm excited about many more improvements that are still in the pipeline that haven't been released yet, and you'll see in the future releases. While Angular tries really hard to steer away from trouble and keep you safe, accidents do still happen. And these accidents can result in poor user experience. But there is a good news. You can help us prevent many of these disasters. I'm going to share 4 tips with you on how to improve user experience for your application. But surprisingly, or rather unsurprisingly, what we see and hear from developers that apply many of these tricks, they often yield developer experience improvements as well. And this is because the fewer dependencies are in the system, the faster the system can operate and can process all of the code and result in a smaller application. So tip number 1. This one is relatively simple. Learn how to analyze your application, and specifically learn how to perf analyze your application. This might be simple for many of you, but for others, it can be very unapproachable and scary. And in fact, just a few weeks ago, I ran this experiment at an enterprise summit we were hosting in our office, when I challenged the crowd to share their applications with me. And I would take a look at them and quickly analyze them and point out the biggest issues in those applications. And I guaranteed that I would improve the user experience and developer experience for those applications with only minor changes to the application. This experiment was so successful that I actually wanted to share some of these basic steps with you as well. First, please install SourceMap Explorer. This is a tool that will help you analyze the output of your production builds. You might be familiar with another tool called Webpack Bundle Analyzer, which looks similar, but operates on a different level and often results in very misleading results. So I strongly suggest that you use SourceMap Explorer as your first tool when exploring these issues, and use Webpack Analyzer only if you are debugging very specific issues. And this is because Webpack Analyzer doesn't see and understand what Terser, the minification step at the very end of the pipeline, does. And in this step, that code eliminate a lot of code that Webpack Analyzer still considers as retained, which is incorrect. Next, turn on source maps in your production builds. There is just a simple command you can run. This will make a change to Angular JSON, and your source maps will be produced when you build the application. Next, run your production build. And the last step is run SourceMap Explorer on the output of your production build. What you'll see is something like this. I know that the screenshot is very small and might be very difficult for you to read, so don't worry about it. But the point is that you see these boxes. And these boxes represent how your application is composed and what is it composed of. In this particular case, we're looking at output from a very small application that I'm building for my dear wife. She needed a tool to build, so I built it. It's not a very complex application, but it uses material design components, which have a lot of nice features and accessibility features. So it's not a trivial application either. So if we look at this output, what I typically do is I go through a series of steps. I look at the diagram and try to interpret what I see. I point out what doesn't look right. I focus on the biggest issues first, and then I hypothesize about the root cause and try to confirm it. Then I go and fix it and verify by remeasuring. And then I just repeat the whole process again, where I build production builds, rerun SourceMap Explorer, and see modified, improved results. In this particular case, we are dealing with an application that is relatively small. It's 380 kilobytes. That's, for Angular standards, that's actually pretty good. But I know that it could be better. In a big production applications, you will see a much higher number. Don't be too worried about that, because as you go through this process, you will see easy ways how you can improve your application. So in this case, the biggest box, and you cannot probably read it, is attributed to code that comes from Angular core, Angular the framework. There is not much me as an application developer in this case can do about this. So I'll leave that to Kara and other people to deal with this part and make it smaller. And this is what I'm actively working on. The next thing that is quite big is this box at the bottom. And that's a box that represents style sheets. These are style sheets that come from material design. And it's actually surprising that just for me to have nice style sheet defaults, there's actually quite a lot of code that is associated with it. I'm not sure if I can do anything about this as an application developer. Maybe I can try removing it and see what my application looks without the theme and the style sheets. But maybe the right thing in this case would be to talk to Jeremy or file an issue against Angular components and say, hey, these style sheets are actually pretty big. Could you do anything about that? The next big box is animations. These are Angular animations. This is code that powers Angular animations. In my particular application, I'm actually surprised that I see that animations are being pulled into my application, because I don't really have any animations as far as I know in my application. So maybe I should look and see, am I accidentally importing animations when I don't need them? And if I don't need them, remove them. The next one is down here, the polyfill zone.js. So zone.js is a library that allows us to trigger change detection automatically. In my application, the application is actually so small that if I wanted to shave extra 30, kilobytes, I could actually do without Zone.js and trigger zone change detection manually. I don't know yet if that's what I want to do in my application, but that's something that should be on my list. And the last one is forms. In this case, it's surprising that that much code is being pulled into forms. But if I look at my application, there's actually a lot of UI patterns in my application that require accessibility affordances. And I know that the forms library provides those. So that seems like a good trade-off in order for my application to be accessible. With this list, I can then go and explore and tweak my application, file bugs against Angular, or fix issues in my application. If you try this on your application, you'll probably see much higher numbers because my application is very small. And what I bet you will see is that most of the problems will actually come from third-party libraries, and we'll talk about those in a bit. But before we get there, I just want to quickly summarize the tools that do performance analysis and testing. So we already talked about Source Map Explorer, which is invaluable when it comes to analyzing what actually gets shipped into the browser. The next one I really like is Lighthouse and its online variant web.dev/measure. This is a tool that runs a lot of reports and audits on my application and allows me to get lots of insights. And the last one I use quite frequently is webpagetest.org/easy. This is a pre-configured version of WebPageTest that allows me to test my application on real devices on real networks, which is super, super handy. Let's move to tip number 2. I already mentioned third-party libraries and them being a common source of problems. So I really advise you, if you start taking on dependencies on third-party code, do it very wisely. You might, however, be kind of stuck and not know what wisely means and which libraries are good. So I give you one simple tip. If a library that you want to depend on in your browser code ships in CommonJS or AMD format as the default or the primary way, and the ES module format is not available, do not use it. This will cause lots of de-optimizations in your build pipeline and make your application much bigger, as well as make your application build much slower. Instead, prefer libraries that are bundled and published to NPM in the ES module format. This is easily recognizable if you just look at the code or if you look at the package.json. And in the future, I think that we'll see more and more libraries using the ES module format as the default. Tip number 3, lazy load everything, or almost everything. These days, it's actually quite easy. You can use dynamic imports. You can lazy load images. You can lazy load other assets. Please do so. In Angular applications, the only current sticky point is lazy loading of components, and I'll mention that as something that we're actively working on. Tip number 4, the last tip, stay up to date. I already mentioned that staying up to date helps you get all the benefits very quickly, very easily. We put a lot of effort into not breaking your application and making the updates very automated. And to do that, we actually have ng-update command, which does several things. It updates your dependencies. It runs automated migrations that either migrate you over from deprecated APIs to new APIs, or even improve your configuration of your project to be more aligned with better defaults and help you catch issues, whether they are bugs or performance issues. And lastly, it will also point you to migration docs so that you know what happened to your project whenever we make changes to your project. Some people still wonder if ng-update works. The good news is it does, and we know so because from our telemetry as well as from surveys, we see that most users are either on the latest or the last 2 versions of Angular. So ng-update really works and makes this easy. Please use it. It's going to make such a big difference. We covered quite a lot of stuff in a short time. There's still one more thing that I want to mention. We're continuously working on more improvements. We can't commit to timelines or exact specifications yet, but I can tell you what we're exploring and what you might see coming in the future releases. So some of the ideas we're exploring are better, stricter defaults. I'm saying stricter very carefully because we don't want to break applications. We don't want to make it difficult for you to get to the new version of Angular. So we're evaluating every stricter default or better default and the impact this on applications and coming up with strategies how to make it easier for you to get on this better default. The next one is highly requested first-class support for dynamic component lazy loading. This is currently possible in Angular. Ivy made it much easier, but there are still few gotchas. So we're not documenting and asking you to do it in one particular way. This is one of the top requests that I hear from developers, and we're quite aware that this is something that you would like, and we're exploring it. The next one is warning and errors when we detect common performance issues. The good example of this is third-party libraries. Wouldn't it be nice if you started depending on a library, but the library ships only in CommonJS format, and we told you? This is one of the things that we're exploring. We definitely want to let you know that that is happening. We're just trying to figure out how to do it in an ecosystem that is currently full of libraries that are shipped and published in a less than great format. And I'm looking at both the libraries in the Angular ecosystem as well as at the wider ecosystem, because there are many, many commonly used libraries that are still shipped in formats that are not great. And then lastly, we have a lot of under the hood cleanup to do in Angular, and especially now that Ivy is done, there's a lot of code that we can remove, and that will make improvements both in user experience and developer experience. So we covered quite a lot. I hope that this is going to be useful for everybody. So let's just quickly summarize. I strongly believe that great UIs make people's life better, and that's why we should care about user experience, and user experience really matters. I do believe that great user experiences are fast and feel real. We have ways to measure this. We should do so. We should analyze and we should optimize for metrics that prove improved user satisfaction and improved user experience. We also know that to build great user experiences, we need to iterate quickly. And we need to safely fail very often. The more we fail, the more quickly we can iterate, the faster we'll find a better user experience that the users will be really happy with. But to do so, we need to improve the developer experience as well. Angular tries to balance these two, user experience and developer experience, but tries to do it at scale. Whether you're working on a large project, on a large team, in a large organization, we're trying to improve the defaults and guide you in a way that will result in great developer experience, but also the user experience. And lastly, if there's just one thing that I want you to remember from this talk, it's please stay up to date with Angular, because as we are improving the platform, the framework, the CLI, everything's getting better, and you will be getting all these improvements for free. With that, thank you very much for listening. Stay healthy, everybody. Bye.